All right, welcome to another episode of the NFL Outdated Cover 2 series. This episode, we were talking about the Indianapolis Colts, and we're going to be talking about some offseason moves with Drake Wally, co-host of the Horseshoe Huddle podcast. How are you doing?
Oh man, I'm doing really good. It's nice to have a head coach. It's nice to have some guys that are on the staff and leaked as the staff. I've heard some guys are leaving, but that's to be expected. But after the season that the Colts had, it's just nice to not talk about mediocrity right now. So feels
Right,
good.
right. Well, yeah, and as a Bears fan, I definitely know that, and it's something about when the Super Bowl ends, just kind of that excitement for obviously in Indianapolis, you're getting ready for the combine and all of that, and then the draft and all that kind of excitement that yeah, I mean a new season is coming and all of that, and just wanted to touch briefly a little bit. Going into 2022, I'm sure probably expected a better year than it was. So just give us kind of a brief synopsis, kind of your reaction from the Colts season this past year.
Well, to kind of keep it as brief as possible without ranting for 30 angry minutes, just from the start, you're thinking Matt Ryan,
Hmm.
fantastic addition to a team that's like the Colts. They've got the line there. They've got Jonathan Taylor. They've got all these weapons. The draft hit well with Alec Pierce and Jelani Woods. You're like Paris Campbell, if he stays healthy, it's going to be great. Revamped defense. You got Yannick Ngakoue, and really, I think what really what really gave Colts fans the initial "holy cow, this could be a bad year" was when they tied the Houston Texans.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just that they tied the Texans; they were down 20-3.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I mean they were like getting their butts kicked, and so that really kind of spiraled out of control. Yeah, there was the Kansas City win. There was, which should have never happened in my opinion. But
Mm-hmm.
once the year got to the firing of Frank Reich, I think that's when you knew no matter who takes over, it's just going to be really difficult. And then it happened. Jeff Saturday got in there, and it's an angry owner who had never really been a guy that quote unquote meddles. Well, he was finally just frustrated over it. You're spoiled by 20 years of Manning and Luck. So I think
Mm-hmm.
my reaction is that this was needed. I know that sounds
Mm-hmm.
crazy. Colts fans have been spoiled for too long. I mean, Bears fans, like, look, Bears fans have been dealing with they've been dealing with this for a long time. Browns
Mm-hmm.
fans, Jags fans, Houston fans. I mean, I can go through all the fans that have had to deal with this, and Colts fans, they've been spoiled. So,
Mm-hmm.
new signal caller coming into town, new regime. It's not what you were expecting. You were expecting playoff run, potential deep playoff run, and holy cow, was that the last thing that happened? So my reaction is absolutely a massive letdown on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 being not a big letdown, 10 being horrific. It was a solid 10. I think it was the opposite of what everyone was expecting.
Yeah, I mean, with what the Colts had kind of like built like defensively in the past, you thought that they were kind of building towards something, and they just needed that quarterback. And I feel like, I mean, obviously the quarterback is the most important position in the NFL,
Of
and you
course.
don't have that. And um, it's so interesting then how some of these veterans they just fall off a cliff, right? Like even Peyton Manning, he fell off a cliff, and it just and yet he had a defense that carried him to that Super Bowl. But when you look at quarterbacks, how important is kind of a coaching staff then as well, kind of just to uh, make sure that everything kind of comes together.
Well, I think a lot of people were really excited about the Frank Reich Matt Ryan connection.
Hmm.
I know that Reich had been holy cow, Andrew Luck, and then he retires, and then you got Jacoby Brissett, then he gets hurt, and you got Brian Hoyer. Well, then you bring in Carson Wentz, a guy you wanted, but a guy Ursay did not like. He hated the fact he lost against Jacksonville and kicked us out of the playoffs essentially,
Hmm.
even though it was a team effort to lose that game. But then he's like, go get Matt Ryan. Everyone was like, home run hit. This is perfect. It's perfect. Frank Reich doesn't have to try to teach somebody how to do something. He's not like an iffy guy. There was I know a lot of people that watch this or any sports show probably watch Pat McAfee. There was a hilarious quote from a guy, former cornerback for the Colts, Darius Butler. He goes, when I'm watching Carson Wentz, it's not like watching Aaron Rodgers. It's like how they drop back and you only see the quarterback, and they throw it and you have to wait for the camera to pan over. I'm not worried about where that ball's at with Aaron Rodgers. He's like, but boy, with Carson Wentz, it's like, I don't know where the hell that thing's going to go. And that's how it was. It was not, it wasn't a very consistent performance. The numbers really lied for Carson: 27 touchdowns, 7 picks. It was not that good. So when Ryan came in, you're thinking, man, Reich gets this guy who played pretty well with a bad team in Atlanta under Arthur Smith. He didn't have Calvin Ridley. He didn't really have a run game, still put up some decent numbers, but it just wasn't the right fit. Reich's play calling got predictable. Ryan, like you said, it's not like basketball where it's a slow decline. It's straight up falling off a cliff, like you said with Manning. Previous, he had like 33 touchdowns, then he throws 17 interceptions the next year. So absolutely, you hit the nail right on the head that the decline happened right when he signed that contract. I made the argument that that's when it happened, is when the ink hit the paper. And what he's going to do next, who knows? He might be able to have some success, but it was just a marriage made in the dirt for Frank Reich and Matt Ryan. You just weren't expecting an offensive mind to not be able to coach Matt Ryan. So I think that's where it stood with Colts fans.
Yeah, and the season just kind of really spiraled, and we talked a little bit about just the really odd turn. Like, I remember seeing it on news outlets, Jeff Saturday as a coach, and I was like thinking, really? So I guess my question is, Jeff Saturday era, is that a bad weekend or a holiday weekend?
When it happened, I did not think I was reading something that was real. I herald Jeff Saturday like Bears fans would herald a Devin Hester or a Brian Urlacher or a Matt Forte or somebody who's just, they were just a dog. You know what I mean? And Saturday was the commander of the offensive line, and you're thinking, okay, you want to hope to goodness. You started to see like pictures of like a knight with a sword and Jeff Saturday's smiling face on it. And it's like, that's what happened. Everyone was like, yeah. Goes out, beats the Raiders and Josh McDaniels, who can't coach any team, in my opinion.
Agreed.
And so you had reason to get excited. And then you just saw that coaches could figure him out about halfway through the game, and then you started to see these insane collapses, historical collapses like the ones against the Cowboys and the Vikings. And, all about the Vikings and what they can do. They're a very difficult team to stop offensively. Well, the Colts were absolutely smacking them all over the field until Jeff Saturday's game plan ran out, and he just didn't have that experience. A couple other things about Saturday is I know that he got a petition. It's incredible. I've never seen anything so ridiculous in my life. You could have had 3 billion people write that and it wouldn't have mattered. But it wasn't his fault. You get called to coach a team, you're probably not going to turn it down.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah.
Let alone after your owner fires the head coach of 4.5 years over the phone, like, hey, you're done. And he's already got Saturday ready to go before that even happens. So Irsay really acted completely out of character. He was just really upset and sick of the year. But Saturday did what he could, and it all really came to a head. I remember I went to the Week 18 game against the Texans, and they were getting beat again, by Houston, and they had to come back, and then they end up losing the game. And it says everything you need to know when you finish 1-7. All right, with 7 straight losses, each one just more painful than the last. You got a practice squad kicker like Chase McLaughlin kicking all your points. I think he accounted for 1/3 of the points. Not even kidding. So not Saturday's fault. I would have loved to see him as an offensive line coach. I would have absolutely been elated if he would have been like, you know what? Sucked as head coach. Give me the offensive line, because they improved. They improved with him. But he made it very clear that he did not want anything other than the head coaching position. He really didn't take a lot of accountability. And a lot of people were like, he's a jerk. It's like, no, he just isn't used to this. He's used to talking as a player or as an analyst. He's not used to talking as a head coach. You got to give him a break. So it wasn't his fault. He was thrown into an impossible situation.
You know what? It's interesting because I think you look at all the different coaching cycles, right? And obviously it was panned by a lot of different people, and people are mad about it, especially with minority hiring and all that. The one thing I did like about it, though, is like, I feel like with the hiring cycles, with all these different teams, it's always, the same thing. And you end up with like like some retreads and things like that. So at least with this, Jim Irsay, I mean, he was willing to go outside the box and just kind of challenge things, right? And say, okay, well, it's my team, and these owners, I mean, they're not going to. I mean, if the Washington owner is still an owner, they're not going to do anything to him, right? So, like, at least he was willing to try this and take all the flack and just kind of see what came from it. So, I mean, obviously, it was. I'm sure he kind of knew it was. The season wasn't going anywhere.
Well, and you're absolutely right. Something that does need to be said is I know that people were like, "Oh, the Rooney Rule, Rooney Rule." It's like, look, the Rooney Rule does not apply to an interim coach. Period. It
Mhm.
just doesn't. You can hire your son. You could, if you have a 15-year-old son, you could hire him if you want. It's literally, you got to get somebody in there now rather than later. It wasn't that the Rooney Rule was broken, because it wasn't. The argument came from, you got Gus Bradley, you got John Fox, Chris
Oh,
Ballard.
John Fox. Oh,
Hey, you know about
yeah.
John
Oh
Fox.
my gosh.
But Ballard wanted Bubba Ventrone. Okay, he
Mm,
wanted Bubba Ventrone, and Ursay had other ideas. Ursay
interesting.
basically, he pulled the, look, this is my team. I don't know how to make sausage, but I know how to make a football team, which, whatever that means. But look,
Mhm, mhm.
I think that it was his decision, because he just wanted to get somebody that was outside looking in. He wanted to, like you said, try something different. And okay, so it didn't work out. You know what? You got the number 4 pick. You have a brand new coach now. You've gone through an entire process to get this guy. And I just think you look back on the 2022 season, and I think Irsay looked at this offseason as it's gone so far and said, I need to take a couple steps, or maybe a mile step backwards this time, because look at what happens when I get too involved.
Right. And as you were talking, it kind of reminded me of like maybe the movie in 10 to 15 years is going to come out similar to Rookie of the Year, right? You talk about like someone's 15-year-old kid to coach an NFL team, and just kind of name him like John Sunday. I think that would be a fantastic movie right there.
Yeah, yeah, and it'll definitely be looked, especially if you can turn this around,
Hmm.
and you can even win 8, 9 games, something like that. You could look back on it and just go, "Oh, remember that ridiculous year? That doesn't matter, as long as it doesn't start this slippery slope where it's like, wow, that, boy, it just got worse and worse and never got better." So I think that when the floor is as low as it is following that year, all you can do is go up. So,
Well, let's talk about then, that. So what are your reactions to the new Colts coaching staff, Shane Steichen, Jim Bob Cooter, and what are your expectations?
we'll start with JBC. I've realized that it's so much easier just to say that, because after you say Jim Bob Cooter enough, you're just like, man, that's you get cackles and laughs and stuff a lot. But this is a guy that, he's been with the Colts before,
Mhm.
and he's also been an offensive coordinator. He's been a running backs coach, I think, with teams like the Jets, and he helped Matt Stafford as an offensive coordinator. That was the people are like, well, the Lions didn't do well. That's the last time they made the playoffs, is when he
Mhm.
was the offensive coordinator,
Absolutely.
under Jim Caldwell at the time. And then, my favorite thing about him is that he assisted Doug Peterson with building Trevor Lawrence after an Urban Meyer disaster. You want to talk about
Mhm.
Jeff Saturday being a disaster? Nothing tops Urban Meyer's disastrous year or not even full year in Jacksonville. And if you
Agreed.
can be a piece of turning around a guy whose entire rookie year was basically wasted,
Mhm.
that's huge. And he has ties with Steichen. And as far as Steichen goes, I mean, you're talking about, I mean, you just talked with some Philadelphia guys not long ago. I mean, this is
Mhm.
a guy who, he knows the quarterback. He's an excellent offensive mind. He's coached Philip Rivers. He developed Justin Herbert. Many forget Tyrod Taylor was the starter until that lung incident happened.
Right.
And so it wasn't even supposed to be Justin Herbert goes out and breaks the rookie record for touchdowns and wins the Rookie of the Year award with Steichen as his mentor. And then you've got Jalen Hurts, who couldn't throw. He wasn't supposed to be able to throw the ball. Well, he sure
Mhm.
looked like he could throw the ball in the Super Bowl to me.
Mhm.
And the last thing, I've actually got a couple stats here. The Eagles were top 10 in almost every offensive category: number 3 in yards per game, number 9 in pass yards per game, number 5 in rush yards per game, third in points. And as far as his tie with the Colts, he's going to help a run game that fell off a cliff, and he's going to assist with a brand new quarterback very, very nicely. I think whoever's walking into that team is going to benefit heavily from having JBC and Shane Steichen both mentoring him.
Well, that's a fantastic, transition. So, what are your thoughts on some of these quarterbacks coming in, and what quarterback do you hope and maybe see fitting with Shane Steichen's offense?
Oh wow! See, we could do a. I mean, between the Bears and the Colts right now, I mean, we could do an
Hmm.
entire episode on whether Young's going to be in a Bears uniform or Fields is going to be in a whatever uniform. But
Right.
for this sake, I think that if we're breaking down the four very quickly, Bryce Young, very fast release. His only issue is his size. Okay, like I
Hmm.
mean, he's the best quarterback, period. If he's 6 foot tall, 6'1", 6'2", no one's talking about anyone
Right.
else. They're talking about Young being the consensus number one guy. I think that he can navigate a pocket. Very, very talented. Then there's CJ Stroud, huge frame, hits every throw on the field. He's got deadly accuracy. For a guy that everyone was like, you can't move. Well, he can pretty well, actually. It's just in OSU, you don't really need to move. It's not like the Bears offense where now you have to have a guy with some ridiculous legs. You know what
Yes,
I'm saying?
I would say that's the thing. Like everyone right now is saying Justin Fields can't throw, but he's had to run with that offensive line that they've had. Number one, and just kind of with the lack of weapons at Ohio State, he didn't run very much. He was throwing more, and so you're right, exactly.
When you've got, yeah, in an OSU, they did this is like you said, they didn't have many QB scrambles designed. They had solid
Hmm.
offensive lines. They had receivers and schemes under Ryan Day where you're open, man. You're just
Right.
open. Anybody can hit those throws. That's why so many of these OSU quarterbacks can't throw when they get into the NFL, or they're just not
Hmm.
used to these tight windows that are this big. Then we move on to Will Levis. Now, this is the guy that Colts fans, I'm telling you on Twitter, they butcher this guy like meat. Okay, like, you've seen it, right?
Oh yeah.
Like they're like, oh, he's just a Carson Wentz clone, and it's like, look, this guy has got a rocket for an arm. He might be inaccurate. So was Fields, or
Hmm.
not Fields,
Hmm.
not in college. So was Hertz. So was a guy. So have other Lamar Jackson, another guy that was very inaccurate in college. But he's an incredible athlete who's way faster than he looks, and he's got an Andrew Luck type body. And I mean, this guy will run you over. He's very physical. But again, Colts fans, boy, if he gets his name called, get ready to hear the loudest boos
So
you've ever heard.
it is interesting because obviously the Bears, they had taken Trubisky, right, and that was when obviously the whole trading up for Trubisky and everything, but he had only started 1 year. And that's all he had. There wasn't very much experience. There wasn't, all of that. With Levis, like I mean, I have to look at it like how long he started, but I'm an Iowa fan, so I saw him. Obviously not this past year, he sat out, but the year before in the bowl game, and he torched Iowa. You know, and Iowa had one of the best secondaries the last couple of years. So that's you look at that. I mean, he has those all those talents. He's got the measurables everyone talks about, but maybe look at. I think they fired their offensive coordinator, through part of the season. But you look at, I think some of these players that aren't at the blue blood, and obviously Kentucky is not a blue blood in football like they're basketball. But you look at some of these players that aren't at some of these top schools, and really you look at their stats almost as I think about it, almost better because they don't have all these 4 5 star prospects, just kind of like third four stringers that are just falling all over themselves to get on the field, like Ohio State and some Alabama, right? So he has to be the guy, and he really has been. So I think he might be a good pick for them.
Yeah, and I agree 100% that this is a guy who kind of had to play a little bit of Superman ball.
Mhm.
And when you have to play Superman ball in college, I mean, your numbers just aren't going to look as glamorous as you want. I mean, those numbers can be very misleading, basically, is what I'm saying. And that leads me to the last guy, who's Anthony Richardson. Now, you talk about the traits, the ceiling, the athleticism, nobody touches him. He's
Mhm.
literally in a cloud on his own. But his big question mark is he's only played 19 games, and he's only had one full starting season, and that was 53% completion percentage. So that's
Mhm.
pretty bad. But again, this is a guy who played Superman ball with a bad Florida team. They were
Mm.
not good. Okay.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
he needs to improve, he does need to improve his pocket passing and his accuracy. But this guy is absolutely ridiculous. All right. He is like, he's got the size of Cam Newton. He's got the traits of Lamar Jackson. He's got the pocket, navigation of a Patrick Mahomes. Everybody's saying if this guy can get put on the right track somehow, he is going to destroy the NFL. And it's like, I that's, leading to your other question. That is my, and I've gotten a lot of flack. I've actually pinned the tweet of him in a Colts uniform on my Twitter. That's my personal favorite. I think
Okay.
that Shane Steichen should bring in. In fact, my co-host Andrew Moore, he wrote about the top 5 fits, veteran quarterbacks who might be able to come into the team and help a guy like a Richardson or a Levis, and that's Gardner Minshew. You got
Mm,
Gardner Minshew,
wow.
who he kind of helped out while Hurts was injured, and he played very well. He went toe to toe with Dak Prescott in a dangerous Cowboys team and dang near defeated that team. So I mean, Gardner
Mhm.
Minshew, bring me mustache Minshew mania to Indianapolis. I think that he'd be a nice mentor for a guy like Richardson, and he's kind of got the wily personality. And he's a little unheralded himself, but I think that Anthony Richardson reminds me a lot of Jalen Hurts. I think that if there's anybody who can develop him, it's Shane Steichen, and if there's anybody who knows how to turn around a quarterback, it's JBC. It's Jim Bob Cooter, as he did with Trevor Lawrence. So I think that that's a good fit. I don't think that he's as far off as people think, and I think he'd walk into a great mentoring situation in Indy.
So yeah, I guess that's my question with that because I mean, when you look at Colts Nation, and even Jim Irsay, right? I mean, does he have the patience to wait out a project? Obviously the new coach. I feel like when you get a new coach, everything's kind of reset. But does he have that patience to kind of wait out that? Type of development, and then bring in someone like Minshew, like that seemed to be bring in that veteran, they've continued to do that. I mean, would that be unpopular within the fan base and even maybe the owner?
That's a amazing question because I think that Ursay, I think that the 2022 anger management session that he had, and the Chris Ballard as Michael Jordan comments, and I don't know how to make sausage. That stuff is an outlier. I really do think that he has more patience than people think.
Mhm.
Everyone was like, "Oh, he's going to meddle and hire Jeff Saturday. He's going to overshoot everybody." It's like, look, if he does that after 2 rounds of interviews, he is just a jerk. Okay. Like, so, and he's not, he's a great guy. He was the top donor to DeMar Hamlin's, charity. I mean, my goodness, this is a good person we're talking about here. So,
He's flown cancer patients, little kids, to games. I've seen that. So yeah, he's yep.
and I do think though that, that would be my personal favorite would be Richardson. But if we're talking about legitimate, the best pot, like probably the most realistic, I actually think it's going to be either CJ Stroud or Will Levis.
Mm,
And I think that Ballard loves Will Levis. I don't. I know that my co-host Andrew Moore has said it. He thinks that Ballard has had his eye on Will Levis. But those two guys have the big frames. They're. I think that C.J. Stroud is actually, if we're talking about one of the most realistic, if we're narrowing it down, it's C.J. Stroud. He's the most, I think, ready to play in the NFL, and
mhm.
him and Bryce Young. Honestly, Bryce Young's frame really goes against him. I think Ballard had a draft expert who mentored, or no, he was a protege under Ballard, and he said, "Look, Ballard doesn't like these small guys. His name's Lance Zierlein. He's like, he doesn't like these small guys." And so it's like, if that's the case, well, then it's got to be C.J. Stroud for me. I think that that's probably the most realistic. That guy's gonna hit the ground running with a great offense, or a great offensive backfield, offensive mind. I think that's probably the most realistic.
So then my question, as a Bears fan, then when you kind of look at it, and we talked about this a little bit already, there's so many unrealistic like trade expectations. But with what the Colts have said, they're gonna if they have their guy, they're do whatever they need to do. So when you look at like if the Colts, settle on CJ Stroud or whoever they, internally settle on, um, what would some realistic trade scenarios be for that number one pick? Because I've seen, obviously from probably Bears fans that, oh, we're going to get Michael Pittman and this and this and this and 100 draft number one picks, which it's just, it's crazy. Some of these scenarios. So realistically, what are you hearing, that might happen?
Well, first off, I want to say to all the Bears fans out there, look, if the Colts had the number one pick, I can't say I wouldn't be like, well, we're gonna take everything. Like,
Mhm.
that's just
Right.
that's
Right.
just what you think if you have the number one pick and you don't
Absolutely.
necessarily need it.
Hmm.
But I think if we're jumping outside of the crazy ones, I think Ryan Kelly is a great start. That's a
Mm.
center that I've
Hmm.
got his contract stuff in my notes here. His 2023 cap hit is 12.3 million. 2024 is 14.6 million. He is owed 6.75 million in dead cap. So over the next 2 years. He'll be 30 years old by the time the NFL season starts. But I really think that with a team like Chicago, if the Colts were willing to move on from him, I think that's a good fit. He knows how to block. He also has ties to Matt Eberflus,
Mm.
who is just a hell of a defensive mind and a perfect fit for Chicago. And so that's the first one. I think the second one would be Kenny Moore, the second cornerback. He's probably the most likely to be traded. And the reason is very simple. He's owed only 7 million for 2023, but he has no dead cap. None. Like, you
Mm.
don't owe him a dang thing if you trade him. And he would fit many defenses well. And he did decline in 2022, but he was good with Matt Eberflus as his defensive coordinator. So I think that both of those guys, even a guy, I'll even throw in a free agent signing. I think that the Colts are not going to re-sign Bobby Okereke. I think
Mhm.
he's going to end up in a Bears uniform. I think he
Mhm.
played great with Matt Eberflus. He's just gotten better and better and better. That guy would be a pretty dang dominant player, especially since Roquan Smith left town.
I like all three of those players, and it's interesting because the first two they're not sexy picks, right? But the Bears have so many holes to fill, and those would be especially the line. I mean, the Bears have to do something in the offensive line, whether obviously draft, free agency, trades, whatever. I think that would be important. So I just want to kind of ask one time here, really clear. Then um, the Bears are not getting Michael Pittman, correct?
You know, I don't think that. I think if the quarterback was in his third season,
Hmm.
and Pittman had the same guy for 3 years and hadn't been producing.
Hmm.
Maybe. I mean, I can
Right, right.
imagine. Seriously, I can imagine Darnell Mooney in the slot.
Mhm,
I can imagine Claypool on the outside. I can imagine Pittman on the outside, and I can imagine Cole Kmet, who is one of my favorite sleeper tight ends. I can imagine them absolutely balling out, seriously.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
I think that it would be a good fit. But with a quarterback who is coming into a brand new team, I can't envision Alec Pierce being a number one. And Pittman has played with the following. He started with Rivers, then he had Wentz, and now he's got Ryan, Ellinger, and Foles. And so this
Mhm,
is a guy who still had almost 100 catches with three quarterbacks that not really any one of them stood out. So
mhm,
I don't think it's going to happen. Ironically enough, I did write a piece on the scenario that it could happen,
mhm,
and but I just don't see it happening. I really think that if it's a trade scenario, you're looking at Ryan Kelly and picks, or
mhm.
Kenny Moore and picks. But look, if we want to dream here, Bears fans, I can definitely understand why you would want Michael Pittman. Absolutely think he would do fantastic on that team with Justin Fields.
Well, just kind of a little bit of an aside. I tried to with another Colts podcaster throughout the year. I tried to get a nickname for the Colts wide receivers to stick. It I don't think it quite has yet. I was going to call them the law firm um, of Pittman, Pearson, Campbell. So,
There you
uh,
go.
but
That's
I'm going to keep
awesome.
saying that. Kind of try to make fetch happen here with that. Um, but yeah, I mean, so like I like those. I feel like that is a little bit more realistic when obviously, yes, I'd love to have Pittman, but you know, he's out there. But when you talk about some of these other pieces, contract situation, I like those as well. I think that's great to hear. And you kind of look at some other realistic, draft analysis. I mean, obviously, it'll be interesting to see if the Bears trade down with the Colts first, and then maybe, or with the Texans first, then to the Colts. Um, but if you look at the Colts, I think someone said number 4 overall pick, second rounder, fourth rounder, and a 2024 third rounder. Now, it like as a Bears fan, like that, doesn't sound very exciting, but really, it's really about building. I think, in my opinion, for 2024.
Yeah, and when it comes to you see the Colts and the Bears are in different situations, but really not, because Fields had, like, a guy like Justin Fields. I know that it hasn't panned out, with super duper high end wins, and I think it was 3 or 4 wins last season for Chi-Town. But the thing is, there was a couple games where I was like, my goodness, this guy, if you could just get him some blocking.
Hmm.
I mean, Justin Fields, if you just get this guy blocking, he's out there running for over 150 yards and they still lose. And it's like, how does that happen? I'm just like, I'm thinking to myself, oh, well, the Bears want to trade Fields and they want to trade Fields. They
Hmm.
want Bryce Young. It's like, look, you're not far off. If
Hmm.
you're the Bears organization, you just need to get a couple more weapons, and most importantly, blocking, because the defense is always going to be there with a head coach that understands how to maximize a defense's performance.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting because when you talk about playoffs and head coaches, and what was the stat? I think 7 of 8 of the final coaches were offensive minded coaches. Obviously the Bears went Eberflus defense because I think in the past they tried to do offense with Nagy and it just didn't pan
Oh,
out.
whew,
you
yeah.
know and so they wanted to have someone to kind of provide stability, kind of almost like a CEO type. And I think Eberflus has done that stability. Now the Colts, obviously, they've moved more offense. I mean, were you when you talk about the hire there a little bit more? Were you excited then that it would be an offensive minded coach?
My I, I think a lot of people were perfectly fine if Raheem Morris would have been hired. I absolutely love that guy. I think that he
Hmm.
is overdue at this point for
Yep.
a position. In fact, if you're going to hire a defensive guy like John Gannon in Arizona, I don't understand why in the hell you didn't just hire Raheem Morris. But
Eagles
um,
fans didn't like him anyway. They were ready to get rid of him.
well, I mean, and that's very fair.
Yeah.
And I actually really liked Raheem Morris. I liked Brian Callahan. But absolutely, I thought that, where the Colts were going, you had Pagano before, and yes, you had Reich as an offensive guy, but Reich, it was a mixture of constant carousels at quarterback, injuries here and there, and then the 2022 season, you trust Matt Pryor at left tackle and you trust Danny Pinner at right guard. And those two are just holes in the offensive line. It's 3-on-5 or 3-on-4
Mhm,
on any given down,
mhm.
and then you're scrambling around to pick the right person and fill that position. So I think it was much needed to take a guy that was arguably the most offensively talented mind of the coaches, and mix that with a quarterback situation where you got to have a guy who can come in and teach this guy how to throw. I mean, this is a guy who was working on Philip Rivers' footwork. I think it was another guy on the Horseshoe Huddle channel, Shad McGinnis, mentioned that he actually met Shane Steichen and asked him, what are you doing with Philip Rivers over there? I think it was in San Diego, or I can't remember if they were L.A. at the time. No, they were San Diego, and he said,
Mhm,
we're working on footwork. It's important to work on footwork. This is a guy at the time, Philip Rivers, had been in the NFL. He'd been a starter for like 10 years. He'd been a great
mhm,
starter. Shane
mhm,
Steichen does not care. He wants you to work. He wants you to consistently keep those tools honed in. They needed a guy who can develop a quarterback, and they also needed an offensive coordinator who could also help with that. So they got a two-headed like team. I think a nice little collab going on with the Colts. So I was happy to see an offensive guy. My number one was Morris because of his staff connections.
mhm.
But I would be lying if I said I'm not happy with Shane Steichen at the helm.
So when you heard about the Frank Reich hire, what were your thoughts on that, and what are they getting for him as a head coach?
Who, Reich gets Reich gets a lot of flack.
Mhm.
What Reich gets, and I understand people were like, "Oh, well, he got to do whatever he wanted. He was allowed to do whatever he needed to do." Well, you come into a situation where you were the silver medal. Okay,
Mhm.
Josh McDaniels was the gold medal. All right, and then he goes back to Papa Bill. All right, in New England, which stay wherever you're at. Don't come anywhere near
Yep.
Indianapolis again. But Reich was not the main guy. He walks into a situation. He's like, all right, I got Andrew Luck. Okay. And then Luck leaves like a month before the season. Then you get
Mhm.
Brissett. Then you get all these guys that are churning in and out. You try to talk Rivers into staying an extra year, but he doesn't want to. Okay.
Mhm.
And so I think what Reich gets, I think what if Carolina Panthers fans do hear this, you're getting a guy who now gets to harness a new quarterback. They're probably going to draft a quarterback. They may even trade up. All right. And
Mhm.
regardless of
Mhm.
who they get, this is a guy who played quarterback. All right. And up until the Vikings did what they did to the Colts, he was responsible for the largest comeback in college football history and the largest comeback in NFL history. So this
Mhm.
is a guy who is poised under pressure. He might not be that enigmatic loudmouth that some want, or like the fiery guy, emotional guy like Shane Steichen, but he's composed. He's building a great staff. You've got Jim Caldwell now as a senior assistant who developed Joe Flacco and helped him win a Super Bowl. Okay,
Mhm.
so you've got a, I think that the Panthers got a home run. He wasn't even out of a job for I think what 2 weeks,
Mhm.
or some crazy, or more like wait, it was, I think it might have been 2 months, but like he got hired really quick. Carolina
He
was
did.
sure of it. So
Yeah.
I think it's a great place for Frank Reich in a division where the Saints are falling apart. The
Yep.
Bucks don't have Tom Brady anymore,
Mhm.
and I'm
Who
trying to think
knows
of
what
the
the
other team.
Falcons are doing?
Who knows what's going on with
Yep.
Atlanta? Is
Yep.
Desmond Ritter the guy? Are they going to
Yep.
bring somebody else in? And Arthur Smith is still trying to find his footing. So right
Mhm.
now, they are the front runners to win that division, and Frank Reich is going to get that team on track. I really do think so.
Especially with the pieces on defense that they had. Yeah.
Yeah, even without Christian McCaffrey, they got Deontay Foreman. They've got. I know they need to re-sign him, but they've got a nice tandem with him and Hubbard. They're going to
Mhm.
bring in a new quarterback. They've got the defense there. They've got Caldwell who can help, and Reich can help develop that quarterback. And you've got DJ Moore, who is an incredible receiver. And
Underrated. Yep.
there's a couple other guys too. I can't remember their names, but regardless, that is a good situation for Frank Reich, and I think it's good for Panthers fans.
Well, speaking of kind of good as you prep, because you live in Indianapolis, correct?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So, and as you kind of prep for the NFL Combine, what are you kind of expecting, and how are you going to be covering that?
Well, so I think there was a chance that myself and the other two new additions I mentioned it before, they're on the Saddle Up podcast on the Horseshoe Huddle channel,
Mhm.
or on the Colts on FN channel. Shad McGinnis and Destin Adams, they were going to be considered to go to the draft and stuff, and so were myself and Andrew. We didn't get that nod, but we do have a couple of our guys on Locked On Colts that are going. Zach Hicks and Jake
Mhm.
Arthur. What we're going to be looking for, honestly, I mean, look, everyone's talking about quarterbacks. I get that. Um, Guys like Levis, guys like Richardson, we're gonna blow everyone's mind, and then people are
Mhm.
for a moment they're gonna be like, well, do we want Stroud or do we want Young or any of that? What I'm looking for is, I think the Colts need a cornerback. I think
Mhm.
the Colts need a depth edge rusher. I think that a linebacker might be needed. I think that a wide receiver might be needed, especially if Paris Campbell goes to the aforementioned Frank Reich in
Oh,
Carolina. If he
yeah.
does, get out of the way, man, because that guy's going to be a deep piece. And so
Mhm.
I think that people need to be looking for those three other positions, because everyone's ranting and raving about quarterbacks, as you know, and you
Yep.
guys, the Bears have a quarterback,
Yeah,
and
I believe
that's
so.
how
Yep.
important it is and how big it is. Is people, even when they've got a quarterback, they still talk about quarterback.
Yep.
So I think cornerback, edge rusher, linebacker, wide receiver. Those are who I'm definitely going to be looking for. Those kind of traits and like how they measure at the combine for sure.
Yeah, the combine is so interesting. It's like I would say it's like men in underwear, running around and looking at measurables. But I mean, when you look at a player, I mean, obviously, in games, it's so much more important to see it. Obviously, I think some of the interviews will be important, but it really, I think when I look at this for the Bears is what storylines can they create to try to generate more interest in that number one pick. That's kind of if some one of the quarterbacks really kind of jumps, says, okay, well, this is the number one quarterback. I think that would be best for the Bears in that. But when you look at the Colts, then as you prepare for the draft, what would the best case scenario be for say the Colts, first pick and all of that? Obviously, you said cornerback, linebacker. It sounds like a lot of positions. The Colts need a lot. So, what would your best case scenario be for maybe their top pick,
I mean, I think
position wise? Yeah.
yeah, I think because the Colts have without going into the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh rounds, because in my opinion, after the third round, it starts to kind of get a little murky. You're
Hmm.
like, all right, is this guy? What is he? Not everybody's Brock Purdy out there. So,
Yeah.
um, I think the best case scenario, I've got a couple guys for cornerback. There's a guy from Utah, Clark Phillips the third.
Oh.
Texas A&M's Jalen Jones. I know that they might not even be available to the Colts by the second pick. Is look, they're taking a quarterback. All right, whether they trade
Hmm.
up, trade down, stay quarterback, no one else.
Hmm.
And they're fools if they don't take one.
Yeah.
I do. You mentioned Iowa. Jack Campbell
Yes.
from
Love.
Iowa is
Amazing.
probably going to be a Chicago. Probably, I think he's got potentially a Bears uniform written all over him. But I think that would be a good pick. I do have. There's so many wide receivers. There's also going to be a depth piece probably at running back that's taken
Hmm.
because I mean you saw what Steichen was able to do with the three-headed monster of Miles Sanders, Boston Scott, and Kenneth Gainwell. I mean, even
Hmm.
Chicago, one of my favorite players was Khalil Herbert. I
Hmm.
absolutely thought that, no offense to Montgomery, but man, Herbert has starter written all over him. And, I mean, I actually wanted to ask your opinion
Yeah.
on like the running back situation because you got a bruiser, then you got lightning in a bottle. So, like, do you think that they stay as a tandem?
So that's the question. I don't think, from what I'm hearing, Montgomery might cost a little bit too much. He might, but on that same, token, the Bears might go after Barkley.
Ooh, wow.
So I think whether it's Montgomery or Barkley, I think they need someone other than Herbert. Herbert is fantastic, right? But he has, if you look at tape, he's um, has a lot of improvement to do on his pass blocking. That's the biggest thing for him. And so if he's able to kind of improve on that in the offseason, I think, and they feel comfortable, then that's when you see them, not sign a Saquon Barkley, or if he's available, obviously, or not, sign Montgomery, because you know they've talked about how the running back is not a premium position. Some of these other positions are more, needed. And there's so many holes, right? But when you look at it, they really need that top defensive guy. I mean, as you know, probably most of all in Eberflus's system, you need I believe it's that will linebacker. You need that those type of top level talent that can be disruptors on the defense. And obviously, we allowed traded and some of those pieces that we knew weren't going to be on a team that was going to be contenders, so we let those go. So you have to get younger at that position, and the Bears, they're going to need to do that. And um, obviously, we'll see if it's which one of those players it is. But I think the Bears do go defense at the top of the line. But you know, Herbert, he's a great player, but Montgomery is he's just that much better. I just don't know that they're going to spend that much money on that one position.
Well, the Colts it's something that I definitely had to say
Yeah.
since you're a Bears fan is that the Colts have got a GM that has always been the dude who's like, all right, let's save this money. Let's save this money, save this money. And I know this isn't particularly a grade A plus free agency that's happening here, but the
Yep.
Bears have got vuku upon vuku bucks to spend, and holy cow, that team can look totally different. And there was
It can.
a graphic that said which one of these 4 teams is going to improve the most.
Mhm.
Colts, I think Texans, Bears, Cardinals. And, I was thinking to myself, oh, well, the Colts, but man, the Bears do have a lot of money where they could put a couple of good offensive linemen who, by the way, they're out there on
Yep.
free agency. I'm telling you, not a lot of people, unless it's a superstar like Orlando or a big name like an Orlando Brown or something.
Right.
People don't reference a lot of tackles or guards or anything like that, but they're out there and the Bears could sign them and it could be a total flip flop. And, Rodgers is on his way out.
Mhm.
Cousins is not getting any younger, and the
Mhm.
Lions still haven't made the playoffs. Okay, so the Bears are also not that far off from taking that division.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think what I like about the NFL is they have to spend that money, right? Like I feel like you look at other sports like baseball, they don't have to spend. You get teams like the Pirates; they're just always bad because they're not spending their money.
Yeah,
They could, but they don't, and so I like that they have to spend the money. And I feel like it's a rebuild. I'm not going to expect the Bears to make the playoffs yet. If they do, I think it's Fields continuing to make that jump, and they sign obviously the line to protect him, and they sign another receiver and draft smart as well, and get some other picks to continue to build. Because I think when you look at as a fan, it's different than as a GM, right? I think when you look at it, um, every fan wants their team to win, you know.
of course.
And I remember like going into last off season and going into the season, I talked about the Bears being a maybe 3, 4, 5 win team, and I mean, it just I was being honest, and I was okay with that. It's about kind of looking at the roster and not just as a fan of yes, I mean, I want them to win. I mean, it was one of those things like so I went to 2 games. I went to the Texans game and I was excited being at the game that they won. But that was a brutal game, right? The only reason they won was like a last minute defensive turnover that Davis Mills just imploded. You know,
Yeah.
they weren't stopping Damian Pierce. I mean, he was running all over the Bears, and it was just there was a lot of problems with that. And then I went to the Dolphins game, and they looked so much better because they were able to do some different things with Chase Claypool. At least the thought of him there.
Hmm.
So I think you look at it. There's so many things when you look at it from perspective, like being honest. Like, yes, I want my team to win, but I want my team to win long term. And
Yes.
when you look at the Colts, I mean, obviously you've had the success, and I was one of those Bears were not so good for a while, and then their defense was fantastic, and I was actually a Peyton Manning fan, and I was rooting for the Colts to win, to beat Tom Brady, to kind of get over the hump. And when they finally did, I was kind of excited, and then they finally got to Super Bowl, and it was against my Bears. So I was kind of like I remember watching that Super Bowl just kind of being like, okay, obviously I want the Bears to win, but if the Colts win, I'm excited for Peyton Manning for kind of getting that Super Bowl. And when you have that type of quarterback stability, that's long-term success. And so when you look at the Colts, I mean, you've had some success. I mean, has that when you look at some of the fan base, is that kind of like soured because they haven't been able to do it recently?
That's absolutely, because you got to think, and even Jim Irsay,
Hmm.
I put this was in an article that I wrote like late last year where I said, is he meddling too much? And
Hmm.
I made a point like this guy took over in 97. Okay. He took over for his dad, Bob, who, by the way, fired an entire coaching staff in a preseason game. Okay, so his dad did not care. He did not like any sort of mediocrity, and he would just pull the string and push that button. Jim was the opposite. Okay, he took over when Jim Harbaugh was the quarterback, and then you get Peyton Manning. All right. Oh, and then he retired or he leaves. He leaves town. Oh, then you got Andrew Luck, who, by the way, I expected 4-12, maybe 5-11. Well, he goes 11-5, and his first career game was against the Chicago Bears, and he threw 3 interceptions and looked like hot garbage. You know who else threw 3 picks in their first game? Peyton Manning. And
Hmm.
they literally had the
Hmm.
same exact stat line, and you could see the greatness right there. Well, Ursay's first basically 20 years or so, you had Peyton Manning, and you had Andrew Luck. Okay, so
Mhm.
after that switches to Brissett and then Rivers and then Wentz and then yada yada, you start to get a little pissed off. You're not used to this. And so he turned into Bob Ursay a little bit and
Mm.
started meddling, but he's just different. And so yeah, I think that translates if it goes all the way up to a $3 billion man who owns the team, bet that it's going to be right at the fan base level too, where people are like, well, come on, man. It's like, well, look, these guys don't grow on trees. Talk about
Mm-mm.
Chicago, talk about
Mhm.
Jacksonville, Cleveland. I mean, we could go down the list. Carolina, outside of
Mhm.
the Newton era, who do you have? Who
Yeah.
do you have? Like, so many teams, it's so difficult to knock that guy and get him. Even the Chiefs had Alex Smith, who did pretty good, but then they had
Mhm.
Patrick Mahomes, and now when that ends, they're going to be spoiled too. So it just
Mhm.
happens when you got to get lucky like that. And that is a rare situation unless you're the Patriots, where they had 20 years of Tom Brady. Well, the Colts had 20 years of Manning and Luck. So, yeah, I think that they've been spoiled, and this is good. It's good to be getting a new rookie again.
Well, yeah, and I'm sure it didn't help within the fan base when Ursay said they were going to win how many multiple Super Bowls in the next, I don't know, 5, 10 years. I can't remember what he said, but it was something similar to that.
He also said, yeah, he said, Matt Ryan, because everyone saw Tom Brady is over here, playing until he's 65 years old.
Yep. Yep.
That's also I'm yet to see anyone else doing that. Rodgers is already declining.
He is.
And he's not
Mhm.
even 40 years old yet. Okay. And
Mm-mm.
so this whole notion that, well, the NFL is tailored to quarterbacks so they can now play till they're 45. No, it is not. All right.
Mhm.
It's just not. It's still a guy with knees and human cartilage between those, or supporting those knees. And so when he said, I bought into it, I was like, Ryan is going to be here for 4 years. I said the same thing.
Mhm.
Not at all. He fell off a cliff. And so I think Ursay got a little excited. I think he was just ready for some stability. And it's going to happen now. And now you can breathe a nice sigh of relief. And on the Bears side of things, Fields needs to stay, in my opinion. And I
Mhm.
think
I
that you've
agree.
got the coaching staff there. You've got the money to now build around him. And regardless of what you do with that pick,
Mhm.
let's say that you trade with the Colts. Let's say that you trade with the Panthers. Let's
Mhm.
say Reich's like, go get Bryce Young, go get
Mhm.
CJ Stroud. You're going to be able to take those picks, build for the future, probably get a star in the like with it, like a Kelly or
Mhm.
like a Moore if it's the Colts, and you have all that free agent money. And pretty soon, before you know it, Fields is he's at the end of his rookie contract, and he's coming off of a playoff run. You just
Mhm.
never know what'll happen. It happened with Andrew Luck. Peyton Manning started 3-13 his first year, turned around and went 13-3 the next year. So it's
Mhm.
just you got to be patient. And I think that the Colts and the Bears are very similar right now, outside of maybe the quarterback getting drafted as opposed to having one in place.
Mhm.
But it just takes time. And Colts fans need to realize that the last 20 years, it was very rare. Just so, so rare.
Well, yeah, and so you even, I mean, when you look at the playoffs, you have to look at the division and you kind of look at, what's the path to a playoffs, first. And for the Bears, obviously, the Lions, I think, in my opinion, I think the Lions are going to win the NFC North, just with kind of their ascension. I don't know what they're going to do in the playoffs, but I think they're going to. Now the Vikings with their new defensive quarter, that's going quarter or higher, that's going to be positive for them. Packers,
That's Brian Flores, right?
yeah,
Okay.
I think that could be helpful for them because their defense was just atrocious.
Oh yeah.
Um, Packers are going to fall off the cliff, and I'm here for it. I mean, I just really am. They're just they talk about spoiled fan bases, right? I mean, it's just it doesn't get any worse than the Packers on that. But I digress. Um, but what I wanted to mainly talk about defense or division wise, when you look at the Colts, I mean, are you worried about the Jaguars most, like long term, or what team worries you most?
Well, the Texans, I think that they're still quite a ways off. They
Yep.
do have some absolutely impressive. They had some impressive rookies last year
They
on
did.
defense.
Mhm.
Damian Pierce, as you know very well, is
Mhm.
basically a bowling ball
Mhm.
that will run over everything. And the Titans, I mean, look, everyone's like, oh nope, they're going to stink. They're going to stink, and well, they're in the playoffs again, or they're competing for the playoffs. They dropped
Mhm.
7 in a row, but they also had Malik Willis, and then they had Josh Dobbs, and
Mhm.
Tannehill was hurt. But I think that the Jaguars, I think what Doug Peterson has been able to do, and they also spent more in free agency than they have in their entire, I think, in their history, and I think it's like top 5 all time money spent. Now you've got Evan Ingram, who had a resurgence at tight end, and
Mhm.
people are forgetting Calvin Ridley is coming
Yes.
back, baby, and you also have Christian Kirk. You have Christian Kirk. You have Zay
Mhm.
Jones. You have
Mhm.
Travis Etienne. I mean, that is a scary, scary proposition. So if you're the Colts, the defense is there. You competed with Lawrence. You beat him once. There was one game where Ryan just could not do anything, and I think that Peterson knew what Reich was doing the whole game.
Mhm.
But I think that right now, the front runner without question, it's definitely Jacksonville. And after that playoff performance where Trevor Lawrence came back, I think he was down 27 points.
Mhm.
That's at 24, 27 points, and he beat Justin Herbert.
Mhm.
I'm just over here going, man, the AFC South needs to be terrified. All right. Because Doug
Mhm.
Peterson has put this guy on a different level. Oh, but the Colts just got the passing game coordinator who helped, develop
Mm.
Trevor Lawrence. So we'll see how much JBC had an influence on that, how much of it was Peterson, how much of it was this. But I think the biggest X factor is you get Calvin Ridley. That is literally a number one receiver. So I think it's going to be Jacksonville.
Yeah, it really, I mean, when you look at that division, and obviously, as a Colts fan, you want to see them do well, but realistically, you're not expecting playoffs in 2023, right?
Um, you know, one of the things that makes me excited about Steichen is one of the videos that was promoted is that he was yelling, not yelling, but he was like emphatic to the Eagles in their meeting before talking to the offensive group before breaking down film. He's like, "You want to win a Super Bowl? You want to win this? You want to win that? It starts with your division." He's like, "You need to win
Mhm.
your freaking division."
Mhm.
And so this is a guy who is going to come in and he is going to emphasize first and foremost, you don't get anywhere unless you win the division. It's something the Colts haven't done since like 2016, I think. So
Mhm.
it's been longer than people remember. I mean, people got used to Manning beating up on Jacksonville and beating up on Houston and beating up on the Titans. And now we haven't beat the Colts haven't beat the Titans in like the last eight straight games, so
Wow. Yeah.
or something like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
kind of like you know that with the Bears and the Packers
Packers.
for
Yep.
the longest time. So where Aaron Rodgers was like, I own you then, and well, there's a good chance that he ain't gonna own he ain't gonna
Right.
even be
Right.
in Green Bay.
Nope.
So
Nope.
it all starts with the division, and I think that the Colts, Jacksonville's definitely the front runner there for sure.
Yeah, and I would definitely agree on that. When you look at teams, you know, it- you have a new coaching staff. There's a lot of things to look at. Positive for the Colts, I think, wiping the slate clean, all of that, and um, it'll be interesting to see, obviously, what all this free agency and everything kind of brings. There's so much always to talk about the NFL. I love it, and I definitely appreciate you coming on. So, where can everyone find you again, and talk a little bit about your podcast?
So it's at Colts on FN. It's the Horseshoe Huddle network
Hmm.
where we it's through Fan Nation, but myself, Andrew Moore, Jake Arthur, Zach Hicks, Shad McGinnis, and Destin Adams. We all write for the Colts. We each have our like Jake and Zach have Locked On Colts. Shad and Destin have Saddle Up, and then myself and Andrew we have the Horseshoe Huddle. And we're on every Monday and Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern time, 6 p.m. Central. But yeah, right now we're in the thick of this stuff, and it's not much different than I'm sure what you're going to find on Bears podcast. It's a lot
Hmm.
of this could be a year where we're not making the playoffs. This could be a year where we're rebuilding some things and yada yada this and yada yada that. But you can find me on Twitter at DWalsterDrake, of course, and at Colts on FN, at the Horseshoe Huddle. Or maybe it's not at Horseshoe Huddle. I think it'll lead you to one of those. But
Right.
I would love to, it'd be great to, if you want to follow any Colts content, that's definitely a place to do it. 6 guys that are just absolutely hungry to talk about the Colts and looking forward to the future for sure after this year.
Awesome. Thanks again for everything, Drake. Everyone definitely follow him, like, subscribe, all of that stuff, and everything below. Once again, this has been NFL Outdated Cover 2 series on the Indianapolis Colts. We will see what the offseason entails. Thanks again.
Thank you.